Hello everyone and welcome back to Nursery World. We are here with the wonderful Dr. Julian Grenier. You may know him as the lead author on Development Matters, but he's also done a huge amounts of other stuff. He is of course a columnist over at TES, a director at the Chartered College for Teaching. Thank you very much. I have notes here and yeah, I needed you to fill me in anyway. And of course a head teacher, maybe most importantly, the head teacher at Sheringham Nursery School and Children's Centre.
Founding fellow of the Chartered College of Teaching. I haven't reached the dizzy heights of being a director there. But,
there you go, I've given you a promotion live on.
But a really good organisation actually that's just about to launch its early years hub. So lots of stuff to watch in that space at the Chartered College.
Oh, amazing. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about it and the process?
So the Early Years Hub at the Chartered College is going to be a place where people in early years education can share information about research. There will be some video materials, free to access articles, really a kind of great place to go for anyone who's in early years at the Chartered College.
Amazing, that sounds great. I know you're here, or you were here earlier today to talk a little bit about communication and language in the early years and in the current kind of climate, let's say. What are your broad reflections on what you're seeing in the nursery school and where you think children are at right now in terms of communication and language?
Yeah, I think if I was just to say a few sort of broad things, if you like, our kids really struggled in the autumn coming in. All those 2-year-olds who've really lived their whole lives in lockdown, suddenly being in this space with all these other children and adults. So we really majored, even more than we normally would, on the kids' social and emotional development and making sure that we work closely with parents to settle them in. And now that has really paid dividends. Those kids are happy, they're chatty, they're really learning well. And occasionally I hear stuff that slightly bothers me going on around the early years field, which is people saying things like, oh, during COVID, we stopped parents coming in and actually it was much easier. So now we don't have parents come in at all anymore. They just drop their kids off. And I kind of think, no, we've really got to get back to the best practices around settling the children in, working closely with the parents, making sure the children feel safe and happy. So those have been big priorities for us. What are
some of the things in general that you're now excited to be able to kind of bring back to the setting? Let's not say quite yet in a post-COVID world, but certainly with some of the brunt of the pandemic behind us.
Well, we've been able to get our children's centre services fully back up and running. So all those parent groups are happening, the stay and plays, the baby services, and parents are just loving having somewhere to come back in. In the nursery school, we've got trips going on again, which I think our children really missed. And one of the things that a few people were reflecting on in that masterclass earlier about communication is, if we want children to communicate really well, give them interesting stuff to talk about. Take them places, do things with them. So it's been really good to get back to those museum trips and just simple things like going to the shop with the children, going on the bus, all those really valuable experiences that really give children something they want to talk about.
Because before when we were just chit-chatting beforehand, you were talking a lot about that, and I guess in relevance to some degree with a lot of the things that people are currently talking around that C word, around catch-up. What's your take on that kind of idea of giving children experiences and making sure that they're, being able to get some of the experiences they might have missed over the last few years?
Yeah, I think we aren't going to know what the impact of COVID to date on the children has been. We won't know what that impact is for quite a long time. But we've got to live this world in kind of real time. And my hunch is that children are remarkably resilient and that they will bounce back if we give them that really high quality early years provision, all the kind of love and care, all the stimulating activities. I just think we've got to be a little bit more at the top of our game all of the time, thinking about all the things that children haven't experienced yet, really focusing hard on children's communication. And I'm pretty optimistic, to be honest, in terms of what I'm seeing. And we have definitely shifted some of our priorities. So, for example, we have built in a lot of extra support for children's communication by working with a program called Talking Times, which gives all children a small group shared book experience with a member of staff activity, if you like, twice a week. And that's really worked to get children's confidence up and talking up. And it's for all the children. Total nightmare to schedule, working out the staffing, but the team are really good at that. So we are just putting a little bit more focus on the best research and evidence around, say, communication or physical development, because we need to be the best we can be. But I'm really optimistic about how the children are responding to this.
It's funny you mentioned that. One of my last sneaky questions that I had was that you put on your Twitter profile that you're an optimist.
Yes.
Are you feeling optimistic at the moment?
I'm always feeling optimistic, even though there are many things to be pessimistic about in the world. But I'd find it really hard to work with children every day and not feel optimism because of that energy that children bring, that kind of joyfulness in their movements, the children's development and learning. And, there's a lot to be gloomy about, but I remain optimistic in the potential of children and the potential of really good early years education to make a big difference to children and families.
How do you mentioned earlier, for example, the example of non-contact drop-off, let's call it, and how you'd love to see more settings, going back to kind of the more traditional ways. Are there some things at Sheringham that you did learn during the pandemic that you've now kept on and that you actually think were great ideas that you'll carry on in your practice?
There were, and I would say first principle amongst all of that is better use of ICT to communicate with parents. So we learn very quickly about what sort of videos parents liked to see, what they connected with, what they didn't connect with. So we use WhatsApp and YouTube a lot now with parents. We don't do newsletters anymore. We don't do those traditional kind of messages to parents that were quite lengthy. We do lots and lots of bite-sized messages, lots of videos. The children love to watch those nursery rhymes, core books being read by their key person on YouTube with a parent, and it's been really great. We worked with Borrow Me, the social enterprise, which is all about promoting home learning, lending things out for children to play with at home and supporting that. And again, that's been really full of good stuff, and we're keeping a lot of that going.
Love that. I guess another thing that I would be remiss for me not to talk about is how you're feeling about Development Matters now with the project kind of having been to some degree rounded out and out there. How are you feeling about the process and how are you feeling about the outcomes of it kind of almost a year on from it kind of being out there and in working, in schools a lot?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really proud of that piece of work. And it was very much a team effort with a group of experts in the advisory board. I think it has succeeded in changing the narrative around making best use of assessment, reducing unnecessary workload, not thinking so much in terms of kind of spurious age-related expectations for children, and thinking more about the early years curriculum, the best quality provision, teaching, play for the children so that they can get the best possible out of their time in early years. So I think it's really pushed the discussion on, and no one, I think, wants to go back to where we were before. I hugely regret the fact that, that we've ended up with a second set of materials. I don't think that really did a great service to the early years sector to have two sets of materials, and I hear it all the time from people like, I don't know which to use, or I'm feeling overloaded because there's so much out there. So I really wish that everyone had kind of come together to support the implementation of the revised EYFS in a spirit of togetherness. On the other hand, I also think it's good for people to put ideas and resources out there. And I think that overall, the discussions in early years about effective approaches to early education, I'm much more comfortable with those discussions now than what was being said a few years ago.
That's really good to hear. I think the other thing I wanted to ask you about was something that, your discussion there around, kind of endless assessment and spurious assessment is something that's very close to our heart. We worked a lot together on what we wanted to do to the family to respond. One of the things I think we still hear a lot from our customers as well is how to approach assessments for children with special educational needs.
Yeah.
We're still seeing a lot of LAs who are expecting kind of extensive tracking to prove in order to get access to funding. Yeah. You recently wrote a piece for the TES kind of exactly about this. Is there anything that you'd like to see change in terms of our approach to assessing children with SEND?
Yeah, I think that we've got a lot of practice development to do in this space, because if we look at how well children with SEND do in the EYFS, there's considerable room for improvement. And I think a lot of people need to hold up their hands and take responsibility for that. And the government has recognised, rightly I think, that the SEND system that we have in this country isn't working well for children. That there's a lot of room for improvement. So when we think about the assessment bit of this, I guess the first thing I'd say is that, like the whole rest of the UIFS, there's far too much emphasis on assessment and not enough emphasis on helping the children to access the mainstream curriculum in the early years setting. What do I mean by that? We have various kind of assessment schedules and next steps, and people are very focused on thinking, okay, so this child can do this, what next? And they're allowing assessment schedules to drive what they do with the children. But the best research we've got tells us that the approach we ought to take is what's called, and I'm sorry for this being a bit jargony, but a structured process of formative assessment. So it's like we've got our early years curriculum, we are aware of where children have got learning strengths and we're celebrating that, and we're also aware of where they've got barriers to learning, and we're thinking, what's the extra help this child needs to overcome that barrier? Do we need to change something about our whole setting to make it easier for the child to learn? So that we're not focused on kind of levels, we're focused on children accessing and learning what we intend all our children to access and learn. And I think that we've got to be much more ambitious about the idea that most kids with SEND can be working towards exactly the same end goals in our curriculum as any other child, but just with the right support. And where children aren't there yet, that we focus on secure learning to help them access that curriculum so they've got every chance of success later on in their schooling. And I've often given the example that, if we are working with a child with an autism spectrum condition and they're not saying many words, that idea of giving them an age-banded assessment, birth to 11 months, or the first stage in a series of stages, is not good, because these kids, they're not communicating like babies. Helping them, the help for their developing communication isn't what you would do for a baby either. It's a completely misleading assessment. And I worry that it also puts a kind of glass ceiling for the child, and that people's expectations lower. Instead, we need to be thinking, what is it that this child is using to communicate? How can we build on that? How can we maybe use visual supports? How can we make sure all the other children can use visual supports? How do we make these areas okay for this child to play in, even though they have some issues with the way we've set it up at the moment? How do we improve it, make it better? So we're always thinking about including the child in a mainstream curriculum, and we're not doing that thing of like applying one-to-one learning support, someone kind of following the child around, supporting them through the day. That's not a good model for children.
Love that. I love as well that idea of thinking about kind of like barriers to learning rather than weaknesses, or I think it's a really nice way of framing it.
Yeah.
I've already asked my one cheeky question about Optimist. I'm going to finish off with my other one, which was, I know you're a huge lover of research and you're always trying to dig in as much as you can spare the time to into new things. Is there anything that you've changed your mind on recently as a result of anything you've read, or maybe just anything that's kind of really forwarded your thinking in a different direction?
Yeah, I guess the two of the big things we're working on as a research school, and on both of them I've changed my mind in a big way as a result of that. So in our project around early communication, we have really taken on board the research about putting more emphasis on helping children learn new vocabulary, helping children to talk beyond the here and now, so that speculative thinking, imaginative thinking, and focusing on children having shared book reading experiences in a small group twice a week, every child, every week. And I think before we had that stronger grasp of the research, we left too many things down to luck. So we thought, this is a good learning environment, the staff interact really well, there's conversation going all of the time, this is going to be good for the children. But we've learnt that that is not good enough if it's not every child every week. So we've changed our approach there, and that's really working. And then secondly, we're doing a really interesting pilot at the moment about children learning maths through picture books, and that's looking really promising. And one day when we finish that trial, we'll get together on Zoom or here, and I'll tell you how it's gone. But at the moment, that's looking like a really positive piece of work, and it's changing our view of how we help those young children learn about number and maths.
It's amazing. I think it's a great place to finish off. Appointment to view Matt and Julian talk about maths and picture books at some point in the near future.
It's
yeah, perfect. Thank you so much, Julian. We'll chat again very soon.